Hey, welcome to the Six Bridges Book Festival. I'm Michelle, and I'm here with Ayanna Gray and Kate Milford. And Ayana is the author of Beasts of Prey, which came out, tell me when that came out.
September 28th, so just
Okay,
under.
so not very long ago, right? I have mine here too. Okay. Um, and Kate, yours is the Raconteur's Commonplace book, and it came out, I have it on my Kindle, so I can't show it as well, but when did it come out?
February
February.
this
Okay,
year.
great.
Yes.
Great. I enjoyed reading them both, and I think you've read each other's, and so that'll make this a little more, even more entertaining. So what I'd like you to do is just introduce yourselves. I want you to tell me a little bit about your book, and then we'll go and let you read passages. So Ayanna, let's start with you.
Okay, sure. So hello, my name is Ayanna Gray. I am the author of Beasts of Prey. Whoop, there we go. I call it BOP a lot. And originally from Atlanta, but I'm now proudly back in Little Rock. This is where I went to high school and I went to college at University of Arkansas. So this is very much home. And Beasts of Prey, it's young adult fantasy. I call it Pan-African inspired young adult fantasy. It's about two Black teens named Kofi and Ekon who come from different walks of life, but end up having to go together into a magical jungle to try to find a monster that has been menacing their city for nearly 100 years. And, you know, they step into this magical jungle and get far more than they planned. So that's
They
Beasts of Prey. Yeah.
They do. Kate, tell us about your book.
Hi, I'm Kate. I write fantasy and mystery for middle grade readers, and Raconteur's Commonplace book is part of what I call the roaming world, which is this group of books with a shared, they're all sort of interconnected, and they're set in this world in which it's like ours, but with the supernatural and the uncanny and the weird kind of like dialed up to 11. And some of them are mysteries. Green Glass House is the one that I'm sort of usually best known for. And in Green Glass House, a boy named Milo is given a book called The Raconteur's Commonplace book by one of the guests in his family's inn, who are all like snowed in for the, not for the winter, but they're snowed in and mysterious things start happening in their inn. And so he's reading this book and seeing some similarities. And in the book that he's reading, the guests who in the Raconteur's Commonplace book are flooded into an inn, tell stories to pass the time. And so he gets the idea to do that or try to do that with the guests at his inn. So this is the book of folklore that he reads, but it is also a mystery novel in its own right. It's as you read along, there's a framing narrative of these characters who are stuck in this inn. And as you read, you realize that their stories, which some of them didn't even realize had connections to each other, are very much interconnected and become sort of the clues and the mystery and the pieces in this puzzle that come together at the end. And
yeah, when I started reading it, I didn't realize it was sort of part of a series, but like you said, it's sort of connected to, but not exactly. And I read someone that said it was a collection of stories within a book, and that's how they described it, and that's pretty much what it was. It's sort of a Canterbury Tales theme to it, I thought. Sort of what me think about. So okay, so Ayana, do you have a passage that you want to read for us from your book?
Sure, I can, and I apologize. I should have probably bookmarked it, but I can read. I can read from chapter 1, which is probably
whatever you think.
Start. Okay, so I am reading from chapter 1, which is called Good Spirits. I name all of my chapters, and so here we go. The hut reeked of death. It was a nauseating smell, both fetid and sickly sweet, thick in the dusk as it filled Kofi's lungs. A quarter hour had passed since she'd last moved. Her legs were stiff, her mouth dry. Every so often her stomach twisted, threatening revolt, but it was no matter. She kept still as stone. Her eyes were fixed on what lay mere feet from her across the worn dirt floor. The victim. The boy's name was Sahel. Kofi hadn't worked with him in the night zoo long, but she recognized his bare face, mahogany brown like her own, framed by tight black curls. In life, he'd had a crooked smile, an obnoxious braying laugh not unlike that of a donkey. Those things had abandoned him in death. She studied his lanky frame. As was Geed practice, most of his body was shrouded, but dried blood still stained the white linen in places, hints of the gruesome wounds beneath. She couldn't see them, but she knew they were there, the scratches, the bite marks. From the darkest corners of her mind, a chilling image grew vivid. She imagined Sahel stumbling through a jungle, clumsy, oblivious to what waited for him among the vines. She envisioned a grotesque creature stalking forward in the moonlight, tongue darting between serrated teeth as it eyed easy prey. She heard the scream.
Oh, wow, very good. Very good. Um, okay, so Kate, since yours is a collection of short stories, your suggestion was to have us pick three numbers at random, and then you're going to read the first paragraph from those three tales.
Yeah.
And I told you earlier that
Black line.
I was telling you earlier that I'm going to randomly select the first one, and I'm going to ask you to read the second paragraph in it because I love the imagery in it so much. And then Ayana, we're going to ask you to pick two more numbers
Yeah.
for her to do the other two. So I'll let you go ahead and tell her which two you want to, which two random number, like between what, 2 and 15? Is it
2 and 15.
2 and
Ooh,
15?
okay. So my lucky number is 13.
Okay.
I'll pick 13, and then I'll, to counter the unluckiness, I'll pick, I'll pick 7.
Okay.
Excellent. I should know off the top of my head which those are, but I don't. So this will be exciting for me too. Okay. So, yay. Thank you. This is fun for me. I hope it will be for you too. All right. So the first book, or the first story, is called The Game of Maps. And I got these very cool illustrations in this book from this amazing illustrator named Nicole Wong. So I have to show you before each one. So this is The Game of Maps. Listen, there was a city that could not be mapped, and inside it a house that could not be drawn. It stood at the bottom of a hill on a street called Fellwold, a lane with a broken pavement that had been overgrown and mostly hidden by ancient, knotty pines. It was the kind of house that in simpler times might have been called enchanted or haunted or cursed. These houses appear now and then in cities and towns that will tolerate them. Sometimes they survive, sometimes they do not. This house, the house in which this tale takes place, had survived for many, many years. It had copper pipes that reached down into the earth like roots. Its woodwork had taught its stonework how to breathe in exchange for lessons in strength. And the ironwork that chased the eaves and climbed the walls and curled along the windows danced in the sunset. It allowed its rooms to roam like cats. It had permitted residents now and then, and when the endless march of the years got lonely, but it never kept them long. It was a crafty dwelling, and it had ways of regaining its solitude when visitors overstayed their welcome. All right, so that's the beginning. And then here's the last sentence. But when the story was told later, as it was again and again and again over the years by the students of Panton's school and beyond, it was reckoned that nobody could fault him for that. After spending a night in Fellwold House, the boy had earned his rest. All right, so that's 1. Let's see what 7 is. Okay, so 7 is The Cold Way. And this is my husband's favorite. Here is a winter place, if you like. When the river Skid Rack freezes, a whole world comes into being in the city of Nagspeak that wasn't there before. A sort of neither here nor there land above the river, but below the district called Flotilla. Flotilla is the island district. Some of it is built on pilings that were sunk Venice style into the muck at the bottom of the river long, long ago. Some is built on boats lashed to the landed bits, such as they are, and to one another. There are bulkheads that ring the whole, but sunken mechanisms move them when the district needs moving about. And they say that once, in order to protect a legendary ship and its crew, every single one of the component vessels cast off and scattered into the skid rack, causing the entire district to vanish in a matter of hours, leaving nothing but those old oaken posts left behind like fragments of an incomplete skeleton. And the end of that one is, now and then they come across another of the Kaldniker's roaming dreams down in the tunnels, and when they do, they're happy to share what they know of how dreams come true. They're not all dark, but that is one of the happier ones in the book, so thank you. And then last is Lucky 13. This is The Gardener of Meteorites. There's that. In another place, in another time, there was a boy who could see the patterns, all of them, and he nearly went mad with it. And the ending of that one, and then one day, the rain began to fall.
Excellent.
good. So good.
So Ayanna, I meant to ask you after you finish reading yours, tell us about this Netflix business with your book.
Sure. So, Beasts of Prey is the first in a trilogy, and that's
Mhm.
definitely happening. Additionally, it has been it's being developed into a film by Clubhouse Pictures, which in partnership with Netflix. And so, you know, I tell people I'm an author. The books, the writing is where I'm comfortable. Film is still very new for me.
Mhm.
But you know, I'm excited about the possibilities, and kind of it's almost surreal to think about something that I was working on for so long going into a new format. But Brian and you know, Melody Cooper, who's writing the script, they've all been really lovely about trying to ask me what's important to me as an author and trying to think through the story. So excited for all to come.
So is the plan for them to do one to include all three of the books, or are they just doing one of the books each
One
time as
book.
well?
One
Okay.
book, yeah, one, which I think is good, because I think it'd be pretty difficult to capture
Yeah.
all three in one movie.
Yeah, we Kate and I were talking before this, and we both finished your book and got to the last page and went, wait, what? This, hold on, that's not, no, we're not done yet. And yeah, and so it's quite the cliffhanger there. That
And
good
yet
work.
it was also, and I feel like I have to say this with like, and no spoilers, but it was also a really satisfying
Oh,
complete tale, which, you know, I love a
Yeah,
good cliffhanger as much as
that's
anybody,
true.
but it's also really satisfying when you can do both. And
Yeah.
that was something I really loved about it. And I was telling Michelle too, like I frantically yelled at you on Twitter. I was like, when's the next one? And 2022 sounded like such a made up year to me that I was like, that's too long. And like, and it's like, that's in like, I mean, the year starts in like
Yeah.
3 months. Like
20 minutes. Yeah.
yeah.
it feels like a made up year though.
I have a question for Kate, and I know that Michelle, you have questions, but I don't want to forget. Have you read Diana Wynne Jones?
Yes.
Okay, because that's your writing style, like it's still your own, but it had such a whimsical, like beautiful prose. That's what it reminded me of, and I was like, I wish these were Studio Ghibli movies.
My God.
Just
I don't even, thank you. I those are two things that I love with like to the depths of my heart, that like Diana Wynne Jones and Studio Ghibli. In fact, like I had an homage in Left-Handed Fate. Like my conclusion, I was like, this is as close as I'm ever going to get to something that I feel like that I can imagine catching that moment of like Howl and Sophie standing out on the field of flowers with the stars overhead. Like, so thank you. They're favorites.
I mean, I don't know anyone that doesn't love them. They are wonderful, but they bring such a joy. And I was like, surely she's like either read, like between the two, she's familiar. I have this, like, they fit together. They all fit in one family. Like, so if you love Studio Ghibli out there, anybody, read Kate's work.
Thank you.
See, I've got to make a note to read that because I'm not familiar with it.
And you can't go wrong. Like they're all so good. Howl's Moving
Yeah.
Castle is the one that was my entry point. And
I like the really dark ones. I'm awful. Princess Mononoke is my favorite.
oh yeah.
But if you've read Beasts of Prey, now you see like how that
Absolutely.
giant monsters, giant creatures, you know, yeah. But
Well, that leads us quite nicely into my next thoughts and ideas, which were about world building. And that's not something that you hear unless you're really talking about fantasy, science fiction sort of books. When you read a fiction book that's set in New York City, the only world building they really have to do is talk about the restaurant that the characters go to and, you know, what their houses look like. Whereas when you go to, is it La Casa? La Cosa?
La Cosa, yeah, La Cosa.
Okay. And Nag's Peak, am I saying that correctly? So we don't know what those two places are or what they're like or anything about them. So you've got to start from the bottom and say, here, Michelle, this is what this place is like, without saying, here, Michelle, this is what this place is like. You've got to sort of, you know, explain it in a way that makes it interesting. And you both did a great job of doing that. And I want to know how you approach that. So like Ayana, you said, okay, I'm going to put this in this town called La Casa, and here's what's going to happen. And here are these people, and they've got this splendor and you're explaining that and all these creatures. I will say that so the creatures in the night zoo they had an exotic sound to them, but they also kind of sounded, you go, okay, there's a gorilla in there, and you could kind of see what it was, but more exotic version of it. And then you went into the jungle and things took a dark turn. And I'm not sure, Anatsu?
Yeah, Natsu. Yeah.
Easily the most disturbing character in the book. I thought she had to do that, didn't she? She just had to do that. So tell us how about your world building, how you came up with these ideas and how you put them into the book in such a way that we found them interesting, and then be sure to explain to us how this guy came about into your mind. And
Yeah.
Let's hear about that.
Thank you for that. World building is one of my favorite things. It's probably why I most enjoy writing fantasy. And I know a lot of people start with character, or they start with a plot, but for me, a lot starts with the world, and I have to kind of know where I am before I can even, because I create a fake Wikipedia page for my world. So, if you were to look up Italy, and you said Italy, and there's a summary, and then it breaks into sections about the history, the geography, the climate, the currency, the economy, government, power, what are traditions, what are holidays, what does religion look like? And I use that as kind of a base. And okay, if there's a religion section in Italy, there's a religion section on my fake Wikipedia page. And in the process of answering all those questions, that's how a story starts. So this is not Beasts of Prey, but if there's a world where only women can be in government, well, that tells you about power dynamics and what would life be like for a male in that society, or a non-binary person in that society. And then you ask questions. And for me, that's how a story gets started. So that's how I started to build the world for Beasts of Prey, but also I leaned a lot on different folklore and different mythologies in the African continent. And I always try to say plural because there are so many from different regions. It's not just like there's African mythology, there's West African, East African, Central, Southern, and a Natsu is actually a pretty thinly veiled, this is why it's fun for me, because I was like, oh, everyone's going to see straight through a Natsu. He's actually very heavily inspired by Anansi or Anansi, the trickster spider who you see a lot in a lot of West African folklore stories. Sometimes he's a god, sometimes he takes the form of a spider, but he's always playing tricks, and sometimes he's helpful, and sometimes he completely sends the hero on the wrong path. Kwame Mbalia, who wrote Tristan Strong, punches a hole in the sky. Anansi is a major character in his story. So he's well known for people who know West African folklore, but the fun thing is people who don't know, they discover Anatsu and then maybe dig into the real creature that he's inspired from. And so he plays a similar role in Beasts of Prey, where he's mostly not helpful.
Right. No, he's not.
Mostly?
Yeah.
Mostly entirely, very much not helpful.
He gives them their stuff back, but then he just sort of sends them into a nightmare. And but there's and I don't I'm trying to be spoiler free. There's a moment later when Kofi and Ekon are speaking to someone who has a little more over understanding, and I have a whole thing in my head about how Anatsu came to be what he is, but there's a comment where she's like, I would never disturb anything in this jungle, ultimately this is nature, and we're strangers here, and we don't belong here, right?
And I didn't do this on purpose, but I think I added that line because I love animals, and I think about stories of shark attacks, lion attacks, whatever, and the animal's always demonized, but I'm actually like, we humans are in
their place,
doing what they are instinctively meant to do. Like, they didn't come to us and do this, we went into their home. And so and with all the creatures in the story, like, they're scary and they're bad, but they're in their home. Kofi and Ekon are waiting, and so part of what I wanted them to do is learn to respect nature and they're guests in someone else's home. So that's a really long answer, I'm sorry.
even if that person is half spider, that's
the creature. There's another creature that people say is usually the scariest for them. A lot of African mythology is like putting animal 1 and animal 2 and smashing together to make something terrifying. And there's a monster in Beasts of Prey that is a combination of two animals, and people usually say that's the scariest, but I don't want to say what it is.
I know which one you're talking about, and it's a close second, but I have a thing with spiders, and I've read that, and I thought I'm just gonna have to go take a shower because I just can't even with the spiders.
Stick to my ears.
So it's interesting that you talked about the Wikipedia page. I did not know that. I didn't run across it, but when I was looking, like I said, as I was reading Kate's book, I realized that it was part of a series, and so I said, oh, well, let me find out more about that series. And your Facebook page has a link to, and it's the Nags Peak Online.
Nags Peak Board of Tourism and Culture.
It's the Board of Tourism and Culture, and honestly, when I was looking at it, I thought, oh, so this is like a real place she based it on, but it's not. It's not a real place, but there's more on that site about this place than there is on the Little Rock tourism page. I mean, I can find out more about your place, I think, than I could about Little Rock, which is an actual city where I live. And it was just amazing to me. I mean, you have let's see, I wrote, you've got accommodations, entertainment, dining, museums. I mean, it was just amazing to me that you had all, and now I'm gonna have to go find this Wikipedia page and see yours as well. I mean, I just can't even imagine how you have all that in here.
Well, it's funny because in my case, there's a slightly less, I don't know if that website predates any book that was ever written in Nagspeak. And it goes back to, I think I started it in 2007, which is actually 2 years before even my first book was published. And my daughter and husband, I can hear them coming in. So there may be small child voices you'll hear in a minute. But yeah, so I think I had finished the draft of what would be The Bone Shaker, which was my first book. And I was like querying agents, and if you've been through that process, you will know like that makes you an anxious human being. And, I'm waiting to, or maybe it was even, 2007, maybe we were even waiting to see, like we were querying the book with publishers at that stage. And I was in between projects. I didn't know, and I was, I think, not fun for my husband to be around. And so, and I, very much like Ayana, I have always been obsessed with places that are characters. And so for me, at the time, and I still do, like Jeff Vandermeer is one of my all-time favorite authors, and his book City of Saints and Madmen, which is all of these connected stories set in this city of ambergris, which is weird, and there's like mushroom people, and but it's also really, it's exceptionally beautiful. He's just one of the most beautiful writers. But his books to me were formative because it was so clearly like, here's this place, and it so deeply shapes the lives of the people who live there that you almost can't really say it's the setting, it's driving everything. And then like the interactions between, the architecture and the weird flora and fauna and all of these things. So anyway, I'm trying to talk to my husband about this one day. I'm like, this book is so brilliant because he says, hang on, here's what I need, because I need 5 minutes where you're not talking at me. Let's make you a website and you can build an imaginary city too. And it'll be like a sandbox, and you can,
I love that.
that's actually how Nagspeak started. And I didn't have an idea for a book set there until, because in my head, it was just this thing I was messing around with and having fun coming up with little, there's weird iron that moves around and all the glass is green because there's this odd iron in the, the sand, and the sand picks up the iron. So, I mean, this is the kind of like nerd sniping I was doing with myself. And then a couple of years later, I had an idea for this first book that was set there. And in fact, that book has never been published. It comes out in like 3 years. It only just got under contract. Wow. So that website predates everything. And in fact, I don't think I've updated it since right around the time Green Glass House came out. And I should probably do that. Oh, but there's something I wanted to say about, Ayana, what you were saying about blending all of these different pieces of folklore. And one of the things that I thought was so neat about, I could nerd out about it for a while, but I remember the early scenes that were set in the night zoo. And this is one of the things that I always notice when people do it in world building, where there's a blend of like the things you recognize and you immediately know what they are, and the things that you don't, but they're close to things that you recognize. And then the things where you're like, do I know what that is? Am I catching that reference correctly? But in the night zoo, all three of those levels of things were blended together and presented side by side, like as if they were just part of the landscape even before they went into the jungle, which I thought was like one of the most amazing things. Like even when they're literally taking these animals on parade
Mhm.
and seeing things you recognize and things that are clearly not. And it does this weird thing to your brain where you're like, well, so is that a real thing? Am I just, you can't pick out what's real and what's invented totally. And to me, that makes for like such an immediately immersive experience reading. It's like, you know, referencing some book from the folklore of the world next to Dr. Seuss. And you're like, well, so is that a real book too? And I found that experience happening over and over. It was really cool. Is never that. But but I remember thinking that we were talking about, you know, and pulling from the folklore. And the other thing about like, there's so much folklore, which also to me makes things feel really immersive, because I feel like that gives you such a sense of not just what people believe, but the things that they believe about themselves that are motivating what's happening. And that's something else that I thought was really cool about this. I'm like, this folklore is not just telling me what these people believe, but I'm seeing so clearly how what they think about themselves, like these stories that they're telling themselves about themselves and each other, are continuing to be levers that move them. And it was just really good folklore. I loved it.
Yeah. That's really nice of you.
Oh,
I mean, they were both.
I don't know what to say.
I mean, it really was amazing. Like you said, the immersiveness of it. You just in both of them. But yeah, the animals in there. There were some of them. I thought, is that a real thing? Is that a real thing?
They're
And
creatures
then
more, yeah.
and yeah, and at the end of your book, you talk about where you heard of some of those, you know, some that you made up and some that you heard of, and sort of where they came from. So there's a fair amount of information when the book is over about where you got all this stuff, which was also really interesting to read. And like I said, I wanted, it's like, is she going to tell me, is this thing real? Is this a Giacomoto thing? Is that a thing? Do I need to be concerned about finding one of those running across that in the jungle?
Yeah.
But the world building, I'm going to have to find that Wikipedia page though. It really was, it was amazing on all of them. And Ayana, you sort of answered my next question, but I'll ask it anyway. But when you're writing the book, because this is your first book, correct?
First book ever.
So what comes first when you're doing this? The plot or the character?
Oh, plot.
Or plot.
I think world, plot, character. So it's like, what is this world? What kind of stories could happen in this world, and who would it happen to? I think that, which is very unusual. I know character driven is very popular in YA, but that's just the way my mind works. I have to go big and then focus down.
And then going, Kate, what about you?
Can I say plot without implying that I figure the plot out in advance? Because like I think in some ways
there's no wrong answer.
Because I would have said I go world, character, plot, but only because I feel like I'm still making up a ton of what's happening in the book as I go along. And I can write a synopsis, but I prefer to make one of the responsible adults in my career tell me I have to before I do it. But I think it is kind of very much like what you put it very well. Like, here's this world. And for me, sometimes it's like, what era in this world am I interested in? What potential story have I hinted at, or do I have in the back of my head that I would really like to spend some more time with? And sometimes it's like, what characters would I like to spend time with more, and then what things might have happened to them, and when would they have been the age of my readers, and who else might they have run into? And I think a lot of this is going to change. I have 4 books coming up that are not set in this world. And so I think that is going to, the way that I approach those things is going to change a lot with that one. One of them is the first in what I hope will be another like connected world situation. And so for that, like, I'm really hoping that I will find some other possibilities and it'll start that way. But yeah, for those, it definitely was different because I just don't know those worlds as well. And so it's weird.
What about, so what's the most important part of a story? Is it having strong characters, amazing plot twists, or epic settings?
Ooh.
Whichever one you want to answer first, just jump in.
That's different. Like as a writer, I would answer that differently than I would say for a reader.
Okay.
Actually, which is probably.
Let's hear both versions.
Like as a reader,
Mhm.
as a reader, I really like a fulfilling character arc. You
Mhm.
know, I can, although I really like it, I like it, but I actually, it's usually the world that draws me in first. So the
Okay.
epic, it doesn't have to be epic, it just has to feel incredibly, like, I have to be totally immersed and pulled into the world, and then I'll go with the characters anywhere. But like,
Mhm.
if the world feels flat or boring or I can't picture it, I think probably that's why I like big immersive worlds, because that's
Mhm.
what pulls me in. So
Okay.
Yeah,
Hey, what about you?
I think in some ways, and I feel like this becomes, I don't want to like smack on adult literature because, but like I feel like writing for kids, you're really trying. I mean, as I think you're right. Like the answer is different whether you're a reader or a writer. And as a writer,
Mhm.
like I don't think any of us want to let ourselves off the hook for any of those things, whichever thing is our favorite. I know when I'm revising, I'm cutting out a lot more about the world, and I'm usually working harder on the characters. And I think I'm not, it's not that I think I'm weak at writing characters, it's just not the thing that's as interesting to me immediately,
Mhm.
particularly when I'm figuring out a book. Um, but I feel like when I'm reading something, I am also inclined to be, I'm less likely to throw the book across the room if the world is interesting than if I'm not drawn to the characters. And that's not to say that I think characters have to be inherently quote unquote likable or that sort of thing. But if the characters are not as interesting to me, but the world is, or the plot is not as interesting to me, but there's other like, it's like there's shiny pictures on the walls, then I might continue following a tour guide that I'm not totally excited about because I want to see what the next picture is.
Mhm.
Um,
Okay.
this
as a
analogy,
reader.
One more time, Ayana.
that's a really good analogy, the tour
Yeah,
guide analogy.
it is.
Thank you.
That is. That is. Um, Speaking of editing your work, what did you edit out of these books? Tell us something that just got that you were excited, you wrote it, and then you just had to, for whatever reason, scratch it and it didn't make it
Do you want to go first, Kate? Or do you want to?
in.
I, does it, you know what's funny? So for Raconteurs, I don't think I could point to anything because that one was so, the stories were so short
Hmm.
that I was so focused on them being short. I was worried because the longest story in it is the first one, The Game of Maps. And I was worried that that one was too long. So I was trying so hard to go against every instinct I have and make that book really short that there were a couple points where my editor was like, you're cutting some corners here. Like, I get what you're doing,
Yeah.
um, but in the book that I'm revising right now, which is another one where it's like it's within the world, but it's a city that I haven't visited, and there's a defunct theme park in there, and the theme park's got all of its. I have cut like just 200 pages easily out of like stuff that I wrote trying to figure out the town and what was in it and who was in it and what was interesting because I didn't plot that one out because no one made me, and so there's a whole lot of stuff that I cut out of that one, but it was a lot of like poking my head into different alleys or like, wandering around without a tour guide. And it's stuff that it's useful for me to know, either to know that it's there, even if I'm not going to use it, or to know that that was a totally dead end and I don't need to, so there's a lot of stuff like that that I've done. And the big thing that's getting cut out of that is a lot of, apparently I have opinions on theme park construction and storytelling within a theme park. And nobody needs to hear my thoughts on that, particularly not in a middle grade that's already like, I have to cut hundreds of pages out of.
Oh my gosh. Ayana?
So when I edit, I do massive, massive overhauls, and I actually can't revise within a text. So when I'm revising, I have to rewrite the whole thing. Even if I only change a word or two, I have to rewrite it. It's a mental trick. It's weird. It's annoying. That's how I revise. So my editor will give me, like my editor's just given me notes on book 2, and I'm going to rewrite book 2, even though I didn't ask me to. I have to start with a clean page and then incorporate her thoughts as I'm rewriting.
Wow.
But for Beasts of Prey, it changed a lot. I took entire characters out, certain like mini adventures within the jungle I took out, because it was just too much. I think the easiest, like most tangible revision was the last chapter of Beasts of Prey. He used to have an even bigger cliffhanger when it is. So I moved the first chapter of book 2 used to be the last chapter of book 1. And my editor was like, I think this might be too, this might be too much.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, I didn't get rid of it. And that's for any writers that are out there, I would say too, if it's hard for you to cut, I would create a document and don't erase it, go put them into kind of special A, so you don't feel like you're getting rid of it, but B, because you could totally use some of that stuff, save some characters if you're writing a series or if you're writing interconnecting stories, you know, go put them in kind of an archive so you don't feel like you're totally deleting thousands of words, because that is painful when you've written a lot and feel like you have to.
That would have to be difficult.
Yeah, so that's a way to get around that mental trick of like, oh no.
So you both mentioned your upcoming books. So don't you want to just tell us what happens in book 2?
Yeah.
We won't tell anyone, I promise. We won't tell anyone.
My editor would probably lovingly strangle me. So, okay, let me see. I think that the title and I think the cover get to be released before the end of the year.
Okay.
Kofi and Ekon are both kind of like, so if you look at Beasts of Prey, there's a map of the continent, but most of the entire story takes place on the eastern part of the continent. Kofi and Ekon are both going to move and we get to see more of the continent. Oh, thank you. That is Ishoza. And they're in the Zamani region. They're in the East region, the whole story. And you can see the jungle. It's really dense jungle on that side. So they're going somewhere new, going somewhere where there are more monsters. The monsters are crueler. The setting is eerier and the stakes are higher. That's what I can.
Wow.
It was really weird to go somewhere new after writing for 5 years in the same place. Even though it's the same world, it's a different part of the world. So it'd be like from, you know, you've lived in New York all your life and suddenly you move to Texas or something. And you're in America, but it's very different.
It's a whole different thing. So you worked on the first one for 5 years?
6, technically. I started it in May 2015 and I was still doing small like past pages where you were like tweaking earlier this year. So So and go ahead.
Well, when you were right, so because it is a trilogy, when you started it from the beginning, did you already know how this third one was going to end? I mean, do you have like an idea of the whole thing when you started, or are you just kind of making it up as you go along at this point?
No, I have vague ideas. And when I went, I didn't plan it for it to be a trilogy originally. I was trying to, because the bad, and I say it was bad advice that I got was, you know, always write a standalone because you're a debut and no one knows you and nobody wants to, you know, invest in an unheard of name. I understand where that advice comes from. If you come with your 170,000 word epic, it's going to be hard to sell, like traditionally. I get it. But what that caused me to do was try to force so much into one giant story instead of letting it be what it naturally needed to be, which was more than one book. So my agent was like, this is really ambitious. I really like it, but there's too much happening. That became more than one book. And when we went on submission to editors, my agent and I wrote summaries of books 2 and book 3, like 1-page summaries, very vague, the kind of thing you would see like here, like very big, with the understanding that they would probably change, and they have, but that's what I had to do. I plot, but I can't plot the entire story. So I plotted book 2, turned in book 2, and I'm not even touching book 3 because what happens in book 3 will be affected by what happens in book 2. So I don't want to lock myself into something for 3. If it's like tectonic plates. If something shifts, you know, it's a ripple, it changes everything. So I have a very like loose idea of what I want to happen, but I'm not, it's blurry, and I'm not focusing the lens because I don't want to. But I am studying Studio Ghibli to kind of like, I really like how those movies specifically tend to end, sometimes bittersweet, sometimes, but with a happy, I like happy endings. So it won't be like a tragedy. No killing off main characters.
Okay, we're glad to hear that. At least we know that won't happen in the next book.
Yeah.
as for your characters, how do you come up with character names, and how did you come up with the title for your book?
Is this me?
Your book was the title of a book within a book, so I guess that's an
Yeah.
easy enough way to come up with it. But how do you
Yeah.
come up with these titles and the character names?
I love names. I love names so much because I love weird words. And I like etymology. I like those words are bugs. I always have to make sure I have, yes, etymology. Okay. I really like finding old words, finding old terms for things. I'm just a big old nerd that way. And so I keep a little notebook, and sometimes there's like ordinary names that go into it. Ordinary names like I could give this to my, like if I have another kid, but I might be a little bit mean if I give that to a kid, so I'll give that to a character. Or, and sometimes it's things like, I think I wrote down just in the notebook I've got here, I wrote down the word samandrin, which I came across. I was making a drawing earlier this month of a fire salamander, and as I'm looking up pictures of fire salamanders, I land on the Wikipedia page, and it turns out the compound that makes them toxic is called samandrin. And I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, because as I was telling Michelle earlier, half the time I don't know how to pronounce the words that I'm writing down until it comes time to consult with the people at Recorded Books so that the actors know how to. So anyway, I think I'm pronouncing that right. But it occurred to me that that would make an interesting last name for a character. And there is sort of like a player class, if you will, of characters in the roaming world that they are conflagrationeers, and they have capabilities with fire. And sometimes among themselves, they call themselves salamanders because salamanders have all this folklore and history with fire surrounding them. So I'm like, okay, that would make a good last name for a conflagrationeer down the line if I need one. So it's like stuff like that I'll sort, like just jot down. And sometimes it's, if I need a name for something, it's like going on to Wiktionary and like tracking the, the different, different language threads that have carried it until I find something that sounds like what I want it to sound like, but that to me also has enough of the meaning associated with it. Not enough that if you read it and pick it up, you're necessarily going to pick up everything about that character from their name. But if you want to nerd snipe yourself for an afternoon, and is that the third time I've used that phrase? And I stop doing that.
Well, I do know that.
Oh, go
so
ahead.
This book was actually written. The Raconteur's Commonplace book was actually written by Phineas Amalgam.
Yes.
Right, and edited by Kate Milford, and he is one of the characters in the book
So cool.
as well. Yeah, it really was funny. Now, does he show up in somewhere else in the world in the other books?
His first appearance is in this book called Wild Iron, which was the first one that I wrote in the city, which comes out, I think, now 3 or 4 years from now. And in that, he was a character who he is a folklorist in the city. And so he was friends with this researcher who is hang on just a moment. Okay. So he was a character in that, and I knew from that he was a folklorist. And then in the book that Milo reads, he is the author of that book. He turns up in the book that I'm revising now, but only as the author of another book. But the other part of that I should mention, so a commonplace book is a thing. And if you are someone who likes keeping notebooks or scrapbooks or journals or that kind of thing, and you are not familiar with the concept of a commonplace book, go look it up. And this is another way you can spend way too much time, going down a rabbit hole. But for hundreds of years, like it's been a way that people sometimes organize stuff that they want to keep in a notebook. And the idea is that instead of going sequentially, you might have other ways of organizing it. So John Locke wrote an entire treatise on the keeping of commonplace books. And he had this weird, not quite alphabetical way of doing it, where he would start off with, I'm not even going, anyway, but people did all different things. Like sometimes it was like, I'm going to have a section that is things about animals, and I'm going to have a section that's things about whatever. You can organize it in any way. But the neat thing about it is, instead of like the notebooks I keep where I'm just jotting down page after page, like whatever interesting thing I think of, In a commonplace book, you're kind of categorizing them, sometimes totally arbitrarily, but you wind up with interesting things on the same page, and you might have ideas that are kind of unconnected, like bumping up against each other, and your brain can form connections between these things or see relationships between them that you otherwise might not have. And it can be like a really fun way of, for one thing, not forgetting weirdo little story ideas that you don't know what you want to use them for, but you might want to use them down the line. And also giving yourself like a little bit of a way to find inspiration that you weren't looking for. And also, like, if you just like cool notebooks and need another excuse to have one, like, allow me to gift you with a reason to go out and buy yourself a notebook. But in this, the reason I gave it the title of the book that is that it is in some ways like it's all of these things that are kind of thrown together, these stories that don't seem connected at all. But then when you spend enough time there and you see how they kind of interact with each other and how the tellers interact with each other and with each other's stories, you will begin to see the pattern and you'll begin to see the way that they come together.
Okay. Ayana, how did you come up with some of your character names and also the title of your book?
Ooh, so I wanted to do lots of things with Beasts of Prey. Like, my literary agent's not kidding when he calls it ambitious. And as an author, you hope you do the things you want to do when you set out the story. But anyway, we'll see. One of the things though I wanted to do, so my name's Ayana. It's a Swahili name. It means blossoming or beautiful flower. And I liked my name. I didn't have a choice. It's my name. But growing up, it was mispronounced. It was misspelled. It's still misspelled. It's still mispronounced. And it wasn't that I was at all embarrassed of my name, but I got really sick of people botching it. It does something to you, whether you realize it or not. And you get to a point where you're like, just call me A, just please, because you get so sick of it being wrong. Right. And at one point in the 6th grade, I actually went by my first name instead of my middle name, even though I'd always gone by my middle name, just because it was an easier name for people to say. And so a lot of the language that you see in Beasts of Prey is Swahili as kind of a way to celebrate that. But all that to say, Kofi, names like Kofi, Ekon, Dakari, Adia, these are names that are common in different parts of the African continent. So to us as Americans, it sounds foreign or exotic, but I wanted, a kid named Kofi. Like, Kofi's a very common name in West Africa. I wanted a kid, in West Africa who like might stumble across this book to be like, hey, there I am. I never get to see my name, because I was the kid who never saw my name on the keychains at the gas station. Like, when Coca-Cola did that challenge where they were like printing everybody's names, my whole family found their names except for me, and I was like, I'm not even gonna look. So I wanted to give kids who had less popular names in the West a chance to maybe see themselves in stories. Some of it's mixed. Sometimes it's like trying on shoes, where I'm like, a name just sounds right and I like it. With Ekon specifically, I named him Ekon because Ekon means like the strong one. And I thought about Ekon, he's this young man whose older brother is like a rock star. His dad was a legend. He comes from this line of strong men. And so, of course, everything about his life down to his name is this, you must be strong. Right. And at birth, he literally is given this expectation. And I wanted that to be part of his struggle is, how do I show strength with that when I'd rather read books? Like, I don't really want to be a warrior. I'd rather read books. And so that was deliberate, but I wanted to have new names kind of be part of fantasy, and again have some kids that maybe have these names be like, oh, there I am, like that makes a big difference, just to see yourself and see people with names like yours in stories. So yeah.
And what about the title?
Oh yes, the title. So the title actually almost changed. It changed a lot before I signed with my literary agent, and then when we were about to go on submission to editors, my agent, who's really wonderful, he's very story minded, so he's almost like having a mini editor within. He was like, what about Beastkeeper? And that was the title when we went on submission to edit. And it was like, in fantasy there's lots of blah, like that's a very standard format. Thank you, George R.R. Martin. blank and blank. Yeah. And I understand, like that's true. And Beastkeeper was one word, it stuck out. And but I ended up, I went with it for when we were on submission to editors, but after it was acquired by Penguin Young Readers, something didn't feel right about it. And I was kind of like, you know, what is it? And I realized it was because Beastkeeper, that's what Kofi is. So that title only reflects her.
Oh, yeah.
This is a story about Kofi and Ekon. And there's a
Mhm.
quote in the book, and Beasts of Prey is mentioned,
Right.
like Beasts of Prey, vanquished in the light of day. You know, I know this is the story with monsters and there's magic and all this stuff happening, but it's a story at its heart. It's a story of two kids who are running from monsters inside. They're running from grief, from
Mhm.
anger, from
Mhm.
sadness, from trauma, from expectations. And one of the lessons I wanted them to learn is that they had to, both in different ways, they had to stop running from their monsters and face the things
Mhm.
that were hard and face the things that scared them. That's part of growing up. That's part of,
Mhm.
and not just as a kid. Like I'm almost 30, and that's part of my journey. Is there are things that stress me out and I tend to avoid them, and it doesn't go away until you stop and face whatever that monster may be. It could be a pile of laundry. It could be in like my
Sure.
taxes, which I'm an adult and taxes still scare me. You know, but learning to, yeah, I think it'll probably always be a monster of mine, the tax monster. But anyway, like Beasts of Prey encompassed that lesson of fighting and learning to stop running and facing your own beasts of prey, the things that are hunting at you. And so that's why it's the title.
Excellent. Well, I've got a couple of other questions, but some other people have, and if you're watching and have questions in the chat, and we'll see what we can get to. A couple of them have already popped up though. So let's see. Susan Santa Cruz says, "What ages do you feel your books are most appropriate for understanding the great differences between kids?" So, what do you think?
Um, sorry, my dog has started barking in the other room. Sorry about that. Um, I'm usually sort of at the younger end of the spectrum. I think, but even with mine, there's kind of a range. So I think Green Glass House, back in the days when we visited classes, I would go into classes as young as third grade. So it could be like, 8 and up. But I know I have, adult readers and teen readers. And I think some books, Bone Shaker, Broken Lands, Left-Handed Fate, those are maybe a little bit older and maybe like 12 and up. 'Cause some of them have some carnage in them that maybe like my 8-year-old would not choose. But yeah, so anywhere in that sort of range.
Okay, Ariana, what about yours?
I say that Beasts of Prey is basically like a PG-13 movie.
Okay.
And I'm always so hesitant to give it a specific age because I remember I read way above my reading level as a kid. So,
Mhm.
you know, for parents and librarians, if you know a kid can handle the bigger words, the more complex world, by all means.
Mhm.
There's no language, there's no sex, there's a little bit of kissing, mild violence. I mean, there's monsters that might scare really young readers. But I mean, I wanted my grandma to be able to read this and my mom
Yeah.
terrified. So it's I tried to make it appropriate, but these are Kofi and Ekon are 16 and 17. So they're dealing with things that 16 and 17-year-olds deal with. So there are some heavier topics like the grief and the trauma and the
Mhm.
parental loss, but it's not inappropriate, and it's like in the content first for a young reader, like an ambitious 11 or 12-year-old, I would say could probably read it,
Mhm.
fine.
There is I am a former children's bookseller as well, and there is always sort of, I feel like there's this big gulf where, we think of, I think, middle grade as being sort of anywhere from like 8 to 12 or 14, and then YA, maybe that sort of like 15, 16 and up, but that
Mhm.
13, 14, 15 age
Mhm.
kind of sometimes falls to the side or doesn't get addressed.
Yep.
And I feel like that's something I would really like for readers to be able, like of that age, to be able to really enjoy my stuff. But I think Beasts of Prey is a really good example of a book that a reader in that range, I think, could
Mhm.
really, really enjoy, because it is sort of, there is, yeah, they feel like they are dealing with things that also would be very familiar to, yeah, I think this would be one that uniquely would be a really good recommendation too for that sort of like
I
that
think so.
Like
think.
preteens.
Yeah,
Thank you.
we need more
Okay.
books that do well for that
I,
age.
I have a 14-year-old daughter, and you're right. Things tend to skew way too young or a little more than I'd like for her to read. You know, I'm like that maybe. I don't know that I want. Let's just tone it down a little bit. So Beast
Kids
of
of
Prey would
that
be a good one. I think so.
And I
I
do
you're
think
right.
like kids of that age are really good at figuring out if they're not ready for a book or a book is not what they're looking for. I think kids self-select that way really, really well. But I do think publishing in general is not great at signaling, like, because
Right.
they sort of know that, you know, there's definitely like a middle grade market that is flourishing and there's definitely a YA market that is flourishing, but sometimes, you know, anyway, sorry. This is a thing that like for years has been like in my head as like a children's bookseller. And I think we do need more for that age. And this is a book that is really good for that age as well as
I think so.
older readers as well.
So Matt has given us the 5-minute warning, and I have many more questions that we aren't going to get to, but I wanted to, make sure we had enough. But so is there anything else you want to put out there before we wrap it up that you want to let people know? Like, Ayana, if you just want to tell us how the next book's going to end, we would let you do that now.
I wish I could. I wish I felt confident in the answer.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, well, I guess I should say, okay, this version of Beasts of Prey, if you
Mhm.
were interested in it, this is it was the Barnes & Noble YA book club for October, which is really neat. This
great.
particular, let me see. This particular version with the blue sticker
Okay.
is a little special because it has some art in the, let me see,
Oh,
some art in the back of Kofi and Ekon, but it also has, I got to do a handwritten, like annotated notes about the first chapter. So putting little secrets and things about how I wrote that chapter. And because I like to draw, sorry, I'm like doing the most here, but because I like to draw, I don't know if you can see it, but there are some
yeah.
little doodles. There they are. And that's so that's in the back. So if you are looking for kind of a fun version to get, I'm sure Barnes & Noble has some sticking around, but other than that, it's at libraries and basically anywhere that you can get books. And Wordsworth is my local indie because I live in Little Rock. So if you want a signed copy, it's probably the place to get it from.
Because you signed some copies there, didn't you? There's some signed copies there as well. Yeah, they are in the chat session. They've got the link there to both.
Yeah.
Kate, what about you?
All I got is, as I mentioned, these books are all sort of interconnected, and I just want to be super clear that even if you have not read any of the other books in the roaming world, if you have not read Green Glass House, it's okay. Dive right into Raconteurs. It actually is, I think, a really good way to get to know the world and the city, and it's the first place where I've sort of like laid out what the magic's like, to like been super clear about, like, here's the magic you've been reading about all along, and this is its significance. And so if you have read the other stuff, there's a lot of good things here I think that you'll get really excited about. If you've not read any of it, it's as good a place to start as any, and it's my favorite of all of them, and it's a weirdo little book, but I hope you guys enjoy it. And I'm pretty sure that I sent some book plates to Wordsworth.
Oh, good.
So
yeah,
I think so, right? So yes, I would love for you guys to, even if you're not in Little Rock, follow that link, and and
you'll get the book plate with the book. So yes, I had not read any of the other books. Like I said, I didn't realize that it was part of a series, and I enjoyed it without having any idea what else was happening in the other world. So I think it's certainly a standalone, but then I found out these other people existed. So we'll go see more about it. And ladies, thank you so much for joining us on a Saturday afternoon. I know you've got trick-or-treating and pumpkin carving and all sorts of other things to be doing, and I really appreciate you coming here with us today.
Thank you so much for having us, and thank you, Michelle, for your excellent questions.
Oh, well, okay, thank you.
So much fun.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Like I said, you can go to the
Matt.
link in the chat and order the books. And there are more sessions for the book festival. It's not over till tomorrow, so there's still more to see. I think there's another one coming up at 6:30. I think I should know the answer to this, but let's see. All right. Thanks so much, ladies.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you, Matt.
Bye.